Go. Okay. I have every faith in you, Cameron.
That's 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. Laura, you're Laura, right? I'm Brian.
Good morning. This is Jack Webster, and this is City Mike. The crisis in the West Kootenays has become graver and graver and graver since Pat McGeer, the Minister of Education, was on my program last week and announced under my questioning that in a couple more weeks, if nothing is settled, he was going to raise the matter with the Cabinet of the Government of British Columbia and, as I put it to him, perhaps try to invoke the Essential Services Act to get the non-teaching employees of CUPE locked out and struck in various school districts in the West Kootenays back to work, because education in the West Kootenays, thousands of children, has ground to a miserable and depressing halt. Brian Coxford is in Nelson right now, and this morning we're going to give you the CUPE viewpoint, the citizens' rights viewpoint, the student viewpoint. We can't give you the school board viewpoint because for some mysterious reason they won't appear. And first to Brian. Brian, how's the score this morning?
The score this morning, Jack, is we're set for some action by the parents and also the teachers today. There'll be demonstrations here in Nelson, then they'll move on to Castlegar, and then they'll have the big afternoon demonstration in Trail. And interesting to note, as you said, the school board people will not show up here. We have everybody else represented. But their viewpoint, and there are some very important questions we have to direct to the school board, but they're not here to answer them today, and that's basically the way they've handled this dispute throughout.
But just a minute, what kind of reaction came from the Kootenays after our stuff with Alan Williams yesterday, who made it perfectly clear that the Essential Services Act is not usable, and that the only thing that could be done or might be done is call the legislature back into session. In other words, no plans for any immediate government action. How do they feel about that in the West Kootenays?
In a nutshell, the union predicted that would happen because McGeer shouldn't have made that statement without consulting with Williams in the first place. The parents disappointed, of course, because any further delay puts you into the Christmas holiday season and you might as well wipe out school for 7 weeks. And of course the students, the people who are going to suffer the most, very disappointed.
Well, now, as part of the program this morning, I've already had a phone call from Pat McGeer saying that he's been treated badly in the news coverage of this particular issue, so he'll be on the air to tell his position again. But apart from that, we're going to look at what Williams said last night as well, and we're going to talk to your guests from CUPE, Citizens' Rights, and the students themselves through their spokesman. Brian, stand by, and we'll start with the CUPE. No, I'll tell you what we'll start with. Let's start with the two statements. We're playing it by ear this morning, thanks to some magnificent cooperation from and assistance from the BC Telephone Company. Let's do this first. Let's square away the McGeer-Williams kerfuffle first and ask your guests in the studio kindly to stand by while we do this. So when we come back from this break, I'm going to come up on the news clips from last night, McGeer and Williams. Then I'm going to bring in McGeer, and then I'm going to come to you, Brian, in Nelson and the BC Tel facilities. Take a break now.
Fred Pike.
Can you tell
They know.
I'm live again. Is there a complete split between McGeer and Williams? Remember, it all started in this program last week when McGeer was here and I pushed him as hard as I could in the public interest, right? So we're going to look at, we're talking about the West Kootenay, the disastrous West Kootenay school strike and lockout, let me say that, so CUPE doesn't get upset. And now I'm going to go to last night's news hour clips in the order that they happen to come between Williams, Labour Minister and McGeer.
I think that everyone has to understand that as the Minister of Education, I can do nothing because the authority is not given to me under the Act. That this situation is dealt with under a different Act, which is very clearly spelled out. And the Minister of Labour has very few degrees of freedom under that Act. That the Cabinet as a whole doesn't have the freedom, so that if you're really going to deal definitively with this situation, it would require a special sitting of the legislature.
Do you think that's going to happen?
Well, that would not be my decision to make.
I don't want it to go on any longer than it need be, but since we don't have the power of legislation to end the dispute within the legislation currently on the books, it'll just take us as much time as is needed, but we'll do everything we can to shorten the time.
So briefly, you don't anticipate any back-to-work order then at any point?
I have not even considered that. Until I have Mr. Gilmore's report, I wouldn't want to even comment upon that possibility.
Dr. McGeer is on the telephone. Are you there, Pat?
Right here.
In what way do you suggest that we in any way misrepresented you?
Merely that all I can do is to take the case to Cabinet, point out that I have not authority to end this dispute. I said to you on television, I said to the people yesterday, that it's a tragedy what's going up there. It's not the first time that this has happened. I said then, and I say now, it's not satisfactory to have situations recurring in British Columbia as they have the past 2 or 3 years as a result of disputes between CUPE and school boards which affect the education of our children. But one cannot expect me to assert authority I don't possess, nor can they expect that of the Minister of Labour. We have to deal with the authority given to us by the legislature. If that authority is insufficient, we can ask that a special session of the legislature be called together to end the dispute, and I certainly intend to do that if the dispute is not settled promptly.
You still plan...
More than that, we can ask that in the future, authority be given to the Minister of Education to see that the education of the children is not impaired by labor disputes.
All right, now, let's not talk about the future. It certainly looks on the face of it as if Williams came to you and said, oh, Pat, for goodness sake, keep your mouth shut about the Essential Services Act. It doesn't apply. Did that happen?
Well, the Essential Services Act is there to deal with disputes. If in the schedule to the Essential Services Act, it is mentioned that this can be applied to education, then it can be done by order in council. Unfortunately, that's not the way the Act reads. So what you have to do is to amend the Act so that it can apply to this situation.
You were wrong to mention the Essential Services Act at all, weren't you?
Well, the Essential Services Act was drafted to deal with situations such as this one, but unfortunately, this is not mentioned as part of the Act, so you have to call a legislature together to change it.
All right, now you must be very unhappy with Alan Williams' very low-key approach to it. You know, don't interfere with the process, this and that, and the next thing, doesn't plan to do anything at the moment. Surely you've got to jazz him up on that.
Well, he has the same authority as I have. None. The legislature has the authority.
Mm-hmm. So all that can happen now is that the crisis can keep building until finally, supposing, for instance, though, we're coming up to Christmas now, correct? Nothing's going to happen even within your timetable. You're not going to go to Cabinet for another week. You got into the timetable. Then we get into Christmas. Then the legislature's called. The kids miss their university entrance things from Selkirk. Is nobody going to act now? Are you not going to raise it now as a matter of urgency?
Obviously, if the dispute is not settled very soon, we'll have to recommend that the legislature be called together, and I would think that the legislature would be called together if they can't get this settled in the near future. It's harming the education of the people up there, and that's a luxury the province can't afford.
Anyway, you stick by your position that action must be taken. You will go to the Cabinet. You realise the Essential Services Act is not usable without amendment, and you hope that Williams and the Cabinet act soon, even with a back-to-work order.
More than that, Jack, I think that we've got to take a look at the adequacy of our legislation.
But now, though, I mean, that's in the
This
future.
recurring in the future.
But now, what now?
And that we don't want to have repeated.
Do you still feel that you were misrepresented last night?
Yes, of course.
I don't think so. I really don't think so. Pat, could you try and watch the program this morning, and I'll bring you in towards the end.
Yes?
Thank you very much, Dr. McGeer, Minister of Education. Now, have I time now? Somebody tell me to go back to Brian, and I have. Let's go to Brian. Brian.
Jack, we have sitting with us Fred Pike, who is the national representative for CUPE, and he's involved in all the situations here in the West Kootenays, and a very busy job anyway for you, Fred, to have to be involved in all these situations, strike and lockout.
That's correct, yes.
By the way, can I talk?
Jack, the situation with us here is the fact that I'm going to have to relay the questions to Fred, but you can talk through me.
Did you hear Dr. McGeer just now? Did he hear him?
Yes, he did.
Fred, as of this very moment, I presume you're angered by McGeer's intervention and happy by William's cool attitude, and you want to see the situation continue until the school board finally comes to terms with you. Is that right?
Jack, Fred, what Jack is asking you is, are you angered by McGeer's situation, his intervention, and the cool attitude that the Labour Minister has taken in terms of this?
Yes, I am. Not at the Labour Minister. The Labour Minister is playing it exactly correct, what the Labour Code provides. That's the structure that we want to happen. Let the strike lockout take its due course and produce a settlement. Mr. McGeer is lengthening the strike lockout. Every time he speaks, and again this morning, his statements have a tendency to allow the school board to sit back and say, let McGeer do it.
Okay, ask Fred Pike just to line out for me right now precisely what the issues are. Is it basically in terms of money? And how does he justify the mass picketing, denying the right of the teachers and the children even to go into cold schools for an hour or two a day? So give him his head and let him talk to British Columbia on this strike in which I'm sure most of the public are against him in antipathy.
Fred, the issues, money, everything. What's the situation here, and are these issues justified enough that we can put the students of British Columbia, 14,000 of them, I believe, in a position where their education is totally affected if this thing isn't settled, and it's probably already has affected them?
Well, I'd like to give a little background to that. The locals in this area, prior to AIB controls, came up with a 2-year collective agreement where the Okanagan settled for 2 one-year collective agreements. Now, this is a period of time when large settlements were coming in, and the Kootenay locals, east and west, fell drastically behind the rest of the province. AIB controls had a tendency, due to percentage increases, to spread that difference, make it that much worse. We are now out of controls, and we are trying to catch up to where we were before the controls came in.
If I can just interject, Fred, is it not true that in some situations, if not most situations, your workers here are on a poverty income?
Oh, many of them are below the poverty level, particularly the female workers, clericals. They're in serious trouble.
I have an example here. A 14-year secretary. She has one dependent. She takes home $650 a month. She only works for 10 months a year, and she has to take the summer off and make do on that income, just over $8,200, below the poverty income.
That's the kind of problem we're trying to correct. And it isn't only in the clerical area. For instance, tradesmen who are around the $10, $11 bracket, our people are making $8 an hour. They're a long ways behind and producing in many areas, repairing rather than new production.
So therefore, Brian, it's money. Money, 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 money. Is that right? That's the basic fight by CUPE.
Is it strictly money then, Fred?
Strictly money, nothing else, and it varies from bargaining unit to bargaining unit.
Okay,
we have 5
Brian.
local unions involved, and each of them has a different composition. For instance, the Trail School Board unit was where we tried to get the settlement in the first instance with mediation, because we have 2 classifications, maintenance and custodial, and that would be the easiest place for settlement.
Brian.
We are so close in there that it is really a laughing matter to think that we would be locked out over it.
Okay, let's take a break, Brian, now, and we'll be back with the CUPE people I will talk to Fred Pike a little bit more before we turn to the others in your BC Tel facilities, God bless them, in Nelson.
They're trying to give them audio in there.
Yeah. The only problem is it kills him, unless he goes to...
We need, in case we have problems.
Give him a time. Tell him we'll go 6 minutes this time.
They want you to hear the monitor.
Tell Brian to take a cue at to watch for a break at 6 minutes.
Yeah, well, either that or they want a telephone here. Well, we've got one phone here.
Okay, unless we go off another line, you know.
Cam's on the line asking for a phone.
This is not, this is not Hollywood.
20 minutes. Yeah.
1 minute.
Can we get it off this one?
Well, clear's the direction. Yeah, we
Go off the other one.
all we can do is splice in another earphone. Can you do that? See, if we put another, if we splice into that line, all it's going to do is make it so we can charge for you to
Yeah.
anyways. What is this? Yes.
Tell him I've got 2 questions for Pike.
Was it?
30. Tell him that
Can only get better.
He's got 2 questions for Pike. Jack has got 2 questions for him.
Is it you're hearing it okay?
Oh yeah, I'm hearing it. Can you hear it?
15 seconds, stand by.
Okay, Jack's going to have a
Stand.
question for Pike. Give him the earphone.
In 5.
Yeah. We'll just trade the earphones and we just go solidly on him.
And then
Okay. Mr. Pike, the teachers have got binding arbitration. Would you go for binding arbitration right now, Mr. Pike, of CUPE up in the studio in Nelson? Where are we, Mr. Pike?
Do you want binding arbitration?
Would you go for
Do
binding
you want
arbitration?
binding arbitration?
In no way do we want binding arbitration. It has to be resolved in this manner.
What's wrong? What is the school board doing bad just now? For instance, they won't appear this morning. What is this all about, the non-appearance of the school board? Do you find it as difficult to talk to them as we do? The school board?
Do you have problems talking to the school board?
Oh, yeah. This is the heart of the problem is accreditation. The school board is not even allowed to speak for itself. They have a spokesman called the BCSTA because of accreditation, and he does the talking. And in fact, in mediation last week in Trail, Grand Forks, there wasn't even a school trustee in the building, let alone at the bargaining table.
But how can you blame the school boards for that, Mr. Pike? The school boards are taking defensive measures so that they won't get knocked off one at a time because they're under pressure from the taxpayers. What about the money involved? I mean, are the taxpayers not worried about the cost of schools? While they may be sympathetic to $600 a month for a janitor, are they not entitled to be worried about the cost of the educational system? Fewer pupils and more teachers?
Jack, we're locked out. We're not on strike. And it's a tactic that the BCSTA is bored from the labor movement and using it, and we're in the process of simply countering that. As far as the money is concerned, we have not heard a complaint from anybody at any time that they were not able to produce the necessary funds.
Except from the taxpayers, Fred.
No complaints from the taxpayers. I haven't heard any.
In other words, you feel the taxpayers and the Kootenays are on your side, and how much of an increase do you want right now, if you can give me a rough figure?
Well, we calculated in the Trail area what we're asking for, and this is the only school district we have, and it would have the effect of increasing taxes for the taxpayer of 77 cents a year.
That's your catch-up money, is it?
That's correct.
That would-
Catch-up money.
That would be your catch-up money.
That's right.
Well, therefore, there is no way that this strike can be solved except by direct mediation with the BCSTA, or direct negotiations with them. Is that correct? And do you plan to continue your mass pickets to prevent the teachers and the children going into schools on a random basis?
Yes, this has just started within the last week, Jack, and it will hot up even more. It's a new system that we're adapting to the general pickets.
It's not fair, though, Fred, is it? Why can't they go into the unheated schools at least and get some education in the meantime?
Well, I'd suggest, Jack, that we're probably doing the students a favor. If you saw some of the film last night on your own station, you see students sitting in school with gloves on, parkas, and I would assume long johns as well. That is not an environment for education nor good health. That's only part of it. The drinking fountains, for instance, just a little thing people don't even think of, are not being cleaned. They cannot be. There aren't any people in there. We're exposing ourselves to mouth diseases very shortly.
And you feel that your action, despite the hostility from many parents, is fully justified?
Well, it isn't a matter of being justified. Everybody, of course, feels that the student is the wronged party. I disagree with that. The student is wronged, but in my opinion and my position, the employee is the #1 wronged party. It's Christmas time, they have families, they are taxpayers. Most of them are working below the poverty level, and they are entitled to a decent increase.
And you're locked out in 4 districts and you're striking in 1, is that right?
I'm sorry, Jack, I didn't hear that.
You're locked out in 4 districts and striking in 1.
Yes, we're locked out in all 5.
You're locked out in all 5.
That's correct. We struck in 2 to begin with, and then, of course, with accreditation, when lockout is applied, it has to be applied to all 5. And it will be lifted on all 5, apparently. We have a written statement from the BCSTA that they will not negotiate a settlement with 1 school board. It must be with all 5.
Well, are they not legally bound on that, Fred Pike of CUPE?
No, they have a constitution under accreditation, and any decision they make in the method of bargaining must be made by the group, but it can be made. We are legally entitled to bargain separately with separate collective agreements.
One final question to you, Fred Pike, and I'm grateful for your cooperation. Don't you anticipate that the government will be forced, if necessary, to call the legislature and order you back to work because of the interests of the 14,000 school children against a handful of non-teaching employees?
Well, if they do, it will be a gross interference with the labor relations process.
My thanks to Fred Pike. Next, we're going to hear from Phil, somebody or other, from the Citizens Association for Educational Rights. Thank you, Mr. Pike. Whose cameras are we using?
You know, if you can crank that just a bit of a notch, we can hear that.
Whose cameras are we using?
Over there.
Yeah. So you know what's going on.
Yeah.
You know the minister said he was misquoted and all that kind of stuff?
Is that right?
Yeah.
Uh-oh.
He said, you know, like he doesn't have the power to, all he does is have the power to recommend to the cabinet that they...
Where is that note of this man's name?
Okay, we're going to
Phil
stick this
Brooke.
around here like so.
No, it's just one of those.
Citizens Association for Educational Rights.
Okay, so
Right to education.
is that as high as it can go?
Really is lacking is
Probably here without the microphone.
Next cabinet minute is Monday.
okay, but
Okay.
he's going to do it then.
He's coming back later in the program. I'll ask him that. Misrepresented?
No, I can hear that off there, and if Phil can hear it.
Okay, what?
2 questions.
Huh?
First, and then I'll ask it. I want listeners to understand how we're doing this morning. I'm in Vancouver. We have an emergency set up in Nelson through BC Tel. I think it's our camera that's plugged into somebody's circuit up there, and Brian and his repertorial guests are sitting there in the studio in Nelson. It's going very well. Cross your fingers. Brian?
Yes, Jack.
Your guest is Phil Brooks of the Citizens Association for Rights of Education, correct?
That's right. He's one of the concerned parents who have been sort of beating the drum all along for Pat McGeer to get into a situation where they could have essential services up here.
He can't hear me, can he?
Yes, he can. I think we've rectified a bit, thanks to the help with BC Tel, we've perhaps rectified a bit of our audio problems.
Okay, ask him a simple question. How many parents are behind this organization How long are they going to stand for this situation? He heard Fred Pike saying it's the old Labour, got to go through the normal procedure and their rights are more important than the children. They need money, they're on the poverty level and all the rest of it. I want to hear from Phil Brooks precisely how the children are suffering, precisely what they're going to do, and precisely what they want McGeer and Williams and Bennett to do.
Well, to answer the first question, insofar as how the children are suffering, there's no doubt that in our minds, and we have it from physicians in the community, teachers in the community, who are speaking out and are sort of coming off the fence, thank God, and they are expressing that there is a tremendous change. Like the report cards just came out in the Fruitvale school, which is one of the schools involved, and the parents are upset because there's a tremendous decrease in the level of the report cards. The physicians are seeing more children with disorders of
emotional?
Just simple disorders of behavior, that type of thing.
Emotional problems?
Emotional problems. We had a physician on the air a few days ago talking about that. This is one of the things that is very evident with the people. And especially now with the type of picketing that is going on, where from one day to the next, the kids don't know whether they're going to have a class or not, because all of a sudden they show up at the class in the morning and the pickets are there. So far as how long we're going to wait for this type of thing for the parents to drastically take some drastic actions, I feel the time is here and it's now, especially with the answer we got from McGeer and Williams yesterday that they're powerless, their hands are tied. It's obvious that the parents have to try and do something. If the government is not interested in helping the children, the parents are going to have to do it.
Well, you had Williams yourself this morning again saying quite coolly that the usual process, he didn't plan to do anything at this particular moment. What do you want? Forget McGeer for the moment. His heart is probably in the right place and he's going to go to Cabinet and say do something. What do you want Williams to do or Premier Bennett to do right now?
Well, maybe we should forget about Williams since he states that he's powerless and just plead directly to Bennett to show some leadership, with his group. Tell him to rally the troops together immediately and take some action, show some sincerity, and show that he's concerned about the children of the province.
Yeah, they've been out, the children have been out since when? October 26th?
October 26th.
Now, how many children involved?
Approximately 14,000.
14,000?
Yes.
Just by the way, are the teachers still on full pay?
Yes.
They're still on full pay, and they're quite willing to cross whatever picket lines there are, except mass picket lines.
That's there's been some development and some encouraging development as far as the parents are concerned. In the last few days, the teachers seem to be shedding their jellyfish role in this thing and seem to be quite prepared to start crossing the picket lines. And there's where we feel that some kids are going to get hurt in this whole thing because they are right there being locked out of the school. And the children, if they're in the vicinity, something is going to happen. And that would only make the problem worse. And that is really what we're scared of.
What you're telling me is that up to now, a large number of the teachers have been behaving like jellyfish. Is that right?
That's very, very true.
But I saw some on the news last night who are quite forthright and want to cross the picket lines and are angry at CUPE.
I'm sorry I didn't get that.
Some of the teachers are angry at the mass pickets by CUPE, are they not?
Yes, they are, yes.
All right, now, 14,000 children. How many parents are really care about their kids up there?
Well, I'll tell you, yesterday we started a campaign, yesterday morning at approximately 10 o'clock, with the help of the local radio station, CGAT in Trail. And with their assistance, we went on a radio broadcast and an interview on the radio, pleading with the people to assist us in sending a petition to the Minister of Education and pleading with him to invoke the Essential Services Act, call the legislature together to invoke the Essential Services Act. We hit the streets with our petitions. The phone calls came pouring into the radio station, and within a matter of about 2 hours, we had over probably in the vicinity of about 1,500 signatures. And myself standing on the sidewalk out in front of the radio station, and all the other parents that were involved, I thank them for that, for coming out and supporting us. out of maybe the 500 or 600 people that I signed up myself, I had 4 people come up to me and said they disagreed that the essential services was not the thing to do. You know, that they disagreed that essential services, so that's 4 out of maybe 500 or 600 people.
One final question to you, Mr. Brooks, of the Citizens Association for the Rights of Education. Now, what was that question again? Oh, yes. What about the money? Do you think the strike should be settled by the school board lifting the lockout and meeting the 77 cents a property owner figure which Fred Pike gave us for the cost of their catch-up? Why not settle the strike that way? Tell your school boards to pay them the money.
The association, as we formed it, and the executive that I'm on, we've been directed, and I agree with this, that we should not try in any way to get involved with those type of statements, because we really do not know the whole issues involved here. We can't tell these people how to settle the thing. We're just asking the government to do that for us. That's what we've got them in office for, to help and represent the children and the parents of the community. For us to try and get involved with all this mishmash is just impossible.
Doesn't it seem kind of silly to you, as it does to me, that the teachers don't strike because they have binding arbitration, and yet a handful of CUPE people can foul up the whole system?
Well, that adds to our whole frustration, of course. We just can't comprehend the whole silliness of the whole thing. In particular, the Minister of Education and the Minister of Labour saying that they're powerless, that they can't do anything.
When are you sending your delegation down to see Bennett and Victoria?
We are sending a delegation. Hopefully, we will have enough signatures on our petition by the weekend so that we can be there on Monday.
Have you phoned Bennett yet for an appointment?
No, we have. The arrangements have been made to this point through the executive people in McGeer's office, and the idea is to present. To this point, has been to present it to McGeer, but I think we may change that. And you know, there's obviously no other source here but the Premier of the province to show some leadership in this.
Are you just going to send a couple of people, or are you going to send?
No, a delegation, as many people as we can.
Many people as can afford to go.
That's true.
Any other action plan? Do you plan, for instance?
Well, yes, we have some other plans that I think it's time that we started initiating to show our real sincerity in this thing, and it wouldn't be to the best advantage of everyone concerned to divulge those at the present time.
Do you plan to have any confrontation with the CUPE pickets when they random pick a school and won't let the kids in?
No, we would not. Again, that would be choosing sides in the issue. And we feel that that is not the way to solve this problem.
Mr. Brooks, I think I can say without losing my non-partisan role, best of luck. I hope they settle the strike somehow. And next we're going to speak to Miss Lehman, a student, I think, from Nelson Bryan, after this break. They would then lift the lockout and they go back to work. Who's on the phone? Ninny Poo. Williams might be needed. If I get the Labour Minister on the phone.
Yeah. Student body.
You see the shots you're taking? Monitoring everything. It's good.
I'm going to make an attempt to get Alan Williams, the Minister of Labour, on this particular program too. And now I want Brian to introduce Miss Lehman and to conduct the interview from the Emergency BC Tel Studios in Nelson. Carry on, Brian.
Jack, we have Laura Lehman, a student at the David Thompson University Center here in Nelson, and one of 14,000 students affected by this situation that's gone on now for 5 weeks, and threatens to continue on into the Christmas session if, of course, the government doesn't get involved soon. Laura, your position in terms of the union side of things, do you agree that perhaps there's an economic situation here for them, an economic justification in that most of them are on the poverty level?
Yes, I do, especially the wages the women are making, the clerical staff. And I really think they have personally, they have a very good reason for striking. It has interrupted my education immensely, but personally I feel they are justified.
So we're into a situation, economically, the union is justified, but perhaps it's morally wrong to dump all these students out on the street.
Good question.
I can't say morally wrong. that's the way unions work. There's always someone involved that isn't involved.
Well, as a student, do you think there's a better way?
No. I've lost a lot of my education, but I can't, as a student personally, say there is a better way to do it.
Would you like to see the government get involved?
It would depend on how the government got involved.
Call the legislature, order them back?
No, I wouldn't.
Impose a settlement?
No.
Impose the settlement that they've already perhaps ironed out now with maybe a bit of a monetary adjustment?
Well, as far as I understand, there has been no offer put on the table, counter-offer for keeping members.
Jack, you have a few questions for Laura?
Does Laura represent the mass of students in supporting the CUPE position, or does she likely only represent a very small socially conscious group of them?
Yes. There are a large number of students crossing picket lines at Selkirk College now. The Selkirk College campus is the only campus that is open.
Selkirk College in Castlegar.
Castlegar is the only campus that is open. So I'm sure that will show most of the students are concerned with getting their education. They have not taken a stand either way. Their education is their main priority.
Is there not a grave danger of a lot of grade 11s and 12s after this ruined year dropping out altogether and not being able to kind of fit in with society because of this strike?
Well, it took me 5 years to get back to school, and I'm sure if the students really want to get back, they will be able to. It really has disrupted my life, but it's something that we're really learning something from it. All the students are.
Laura, are you unhappy that the teachers are apparently all willing to cross the picket lines? Do you think they shouldn't be crossing the picket lines either? Have you crossed the picket line?
I have 3 times to attend student meetings, and that's all. But then the campus I attend has been locked. We have not been able to go to classes, even if our professors were willing to cross.
The trouble is for the high school students. I mean, they must be thoroughly confused and unhappy about the whole business. Eh?
Well, they certainly are having a problem. The university students are having just as much, or perhaps a greater problem, because our term is from the 1st of September until the 4th of December. We have 1 week of final exams after that, and we've missed the last 4 weeks of our course. We have our final exams next week, and it's going to be really hard for us to pick up our subjects and keep going.
What if the strike isn't settled into the new year? Will this not mean that you'll lose your opportunity to advance, say, to UBC?
Yes, the Dean of Studies has made no motions that would...
clear the air.
Yeah.
You don't know what's going to happen, in fact, if it
No,
goes
we
on.
don't. I have one professor that has recommended that we look into transferring to another institution in January.
Don't you think that a lot of the parents up there, while they might be sympathetic to the CUPE demands, are very much worried about their school taxes? Everybody's worried about the old taxation business.
Yes, but if Fred Pike is right in saying personal taxes would go up 77 cents, I mean, there are a lot of parents that are willing to pay 77 cents a year. So CUPE would get their wages they're asking for.
So your students are not... Are you planning to lead any demonstrations in any way about this particular crisis right now, Laura Lehman?
Yes, we're planning a mock burial of education for 11 o'clock this morning. And I'd like to point out that this is not to apply pressure to the government to bring in the Essential Services Act. It is specifically to apply pressure to all parties involved, the union as well as the BCSDA.
Okay, Laura Lehman, thank you very much for speaking for the students. And Brian, will you stand by in Nelson?
We sure will.
I'll get McGeer.
Have we got 3 days, right?
Sure, but still watch the telly, will you?
School boards cannot speak for them. See the camera? Stand by to maybe shoot Linda.
I've got it.
Brian, one thing I've learned this morning anyway is that it seems to be a straight question of money as far as CUPE is concerned.
Yes, and I think if we can sort of simplify that, it boils down to a situation where you've got the Okanagan on one side, where teachers and administrative people are getting paid the same as they are here in the Kootenays. Yet you've got CUPE workers paid by the school board in the Okanagan. In some cases, take for example a bus driver making $2.20 an hour more, and secretaries $1 an hour more. What they're after here in the Kootenays, the CUPE workers, in terms of the economic situation, if you boil it straight down to money, is let's have parity with the Okanagan, because the teachers and administrators have parity, so why not them?
Sounds not illogical. What's going to happen? What are you going to do today?
We're going to go from here. There's a demonstration in Nelson. Here, the burial of education, the students taking part in that. It moves on from there to Castlegar and then goes on to Trail. So all three communities are getting involved in that kind of situation.
Do you get any feeling that the place is really uptight? And, I mean, we don't want to whip up something that doesn't exist, but is there really a tense climate because of this strike?
I think all parties will agree that as time goes on, and if nothing's done in this situation, if you keep batting your head together against the wall and not get any kind of settlement, it's going to heaten up. It's going to produce angry people, and as it goes on, it can only get worse. And one thing we should point out, that the union in this particular situation is saying it's a matter of accreditation. The school boards cannot speak for themselves. They always send a spokesman in from Vancouver who does the negotiating for them. What they want to do is talk to the school boards individually, and perhaps an example of that today is we wanted to talk to the school boards, and you know they're not here.
Well, of course, this is one of these developments you can't really avoid, Brian. The school boards have banded together so that they can't get picked off one at a time, and that's the reason we've got a master contract in the IWA and all the rest of it. Now, I want to speak to Linda. Linda, what's the chances of getting Labour Minister Alan Williams?
Hopefully we'll be able to get him later in the morning.
You might be able to get him later in the morning.
Yes, he couldn't come to the phone at the moment.
All right, because I have a couple of questions for him in case any of his people are listening or watching. You might listen to this too, Brian. The Labour Minister last night was kind of very cool on the subject, but he is not powerless in this situation. I've done a little bit of checking myself this morning, and what the Labour Minister can do, and he could do it today, is he could appoint an Industrial Inquiry Commission. And on the appointment of that Industrial Inquiry Commission, it would be likely that the school boards would lift the lockout, the CUPE people would go back to work. It's not always happens that way, but it could happen that way. So therefore, and the Industrial Inquiry Commissioner, whose findings would not be binding, would report back to the Minister. And the Minister would then be in a position to judge much better. And of course, it's quite possible always to put a time limit, I think it's 14 days, on the appointment of an Industrial Inquiry Commissioner. So I want these people in Nelson, Castlegar, Trail and Salmo to know that the Labour Minister is not powerless. There are things he can do right now, short of calling the legislature together. But with 14,000 children and the Selkirk College students out, Brian, it's a disastrous situation. And furthermore, it's not the first time it's happened. They had it in the East Kootenays. Now we have it in the West Kootenays, right?
Yes, it seems to be a continual situation, and I guess one has to ask themselves, there has to be some sort of better way, that's for sure.
Okay, are you using the camera that Grant took up with you to cover this?
Yes, we are.
And it's hooked into the telephone company microwave facilities?
Yeah, we had to do a bit of scrambling here, but thanks to the people at BC Tel, we've managed to set up a makeshift studio. First time it's ever been done, really. At least through BC TV facilities, and it's worked well.
Well, you may find that you're going to be broadcasting from all sorts of places throughout British Columbia, Mr.
Stand by Telegraph Creek.
Stand by No nasty remarks. The people in Telegraph Creek will write me 1,000 letters, which I won't answer. Now, next thing. You haven't had a chance to find out if there are random CUPE pickets this morning blocking schools again?
We have one situation in Nelson where the school was closed down this morning. There was more pickets there at one of the schools in Nelson, and that's all we've managed to hear about at the moment. But it's a hit-and-miss situation. You only know about it when it happens in the morning.
Now, can you stand by, Brian? One, I want to take some calls from the Kootenays, or from the Lower Mainland for that matter, from anywhere. I want to talk to McGeer because I can't get hold of Williams. And I want you to stand by in Nelson. Is that possible?
We'll stand by.
Well, sit by, even if you don't stand by.
Okay.
Right. hasn't been talking for a year. Next to a few phone calls, and we're going to Stu at 10:05. If Stu is good enough. He's kept it. I wish to God that you'd... Brian, just stand by. I'm going to take a segment of telephone calls to see what's happened. Go ahead, please. Hello?
Yeah, Mr. Webster.
Yes, ma'am.
My name is Nan Henry, and I'm chairman of the West Kootenay Accredited Bargaining Unit in this present labour dispute.
You mean for the school trustees?
That's correct.
Oh, good. I'm very glad to hear from you.
Nelson School Board.
Good.
We feel, and I phoned Mr. Cleves, phoned Mr. Coxford last night, and we gave Mr. Coxford the reasons why no trustees were appearing on the TV show today.
Well, perhaps you can give them...
We feel there is nothing to be gained by appearing on the programme. We are working through Mr. Gilmer, mediator, to try and bring about a quick settlement, and if we feel that while he's still in the picture, the least said the better. And also we feel a settlement can only be reached around the bargaining table, and therefore we do not wish to negotiate through the TV, the radio, or the press. And the students and the parents can phone the local trustees who have all the information they would require.
Well, ma'am, that is a very, if I may say so without being rude, that is somewhat of a specious view. There are 14,000 or so children involved, and you can't expect to sit back and just say, we are going to negotiate quietly. That's okay if you're going to negotiate successfully, but as of this moment, it looks like the most unsuccessful labour negotiations in the recent history of British Columbia.
Mr. Webster, if we could get Mr. Pike to sit down at a bargaining table, we could reach a quick settlement.
Are you telling me that Mr. Pike will not sit down at the bargaining table?
That's correct, sir. He will not listen to any reason whatsoever.
I myself am interested to hear that, and I might well have asked him that. You telling me that he has attended nothing except perhaps an initial bargaining meeting?
That's correct, sir.
And have you given them anything to chew on at all in the way of an offer?
The offer, if he sits down and reads the proposal that we put forward to him, there is plenty of room for negotiations, and we have never at any time said there isn't any more money, but we want to sit down around the table and negotiate.
Is it in fact money?
This is what I heard this morning on the air. Mr. Pike feels the issue is money. We have never refused to talk about money. We've never said there isn't any more money. Please, Mr. Pike, get back to the bargaining table.
What have you offered them in the way of money?
Mr. Webster, I do not wish to get into negotiations on the TV.
Anyway, you're telling me right now that Pike is the guilty party and that he will not sit down, that there is room for negotiation, and he will not sit down because he must sit down with all 5 units. That's his position, and he instead wants to sit down with school boards one at a time.
Mr. Webster, we have been sitting down one at a time. I spent all day in Trail, I spent all day in Grand Forks, I spent all day in Castlegar, and I intend to be at the negotiations if the mediation officer is on the plane this morning.
Well, that's very good indeed, ma'am. That's good to know. Have you anything else you'd like to tell me?
I have nothing at this moment, Mr. Webster. Thank you very much.
No, just before you go, I didn't catch your name.
My name is Nan Henry.
Nan Henry, and you're chairman of the bargaining unit of the BCSDA involved.
And also spokesman for the group.
Spokesman for the group, headquartered in where?
In my home.
Oh, I know, but which town are we talking from?
Nelson.
Thank you very much, Nan Henry. That was informative, to say the least. Can I now ask Fred Pike a question? Nan Henry says, Fred Pike, that you will not even sit down at the bargaining table.
Well, Jack, I think it's interesting to note that Mrs. Hendry in the recent elections was defeated by an 8-to-1 majority and is just lashing out at the end of her official term as a school trustee.
Right in what she says. Is will you or will you not sit down at the bargaining table?
No, that is not true at all, Jack. We've gone through 2 mediators now. We've been through the whole bargaining process. Our people went on the strike lockout structure. on the rejection of the latest offer by the BCSTA, and our position is simply there is nothing to negotiate or mediate until there is a new offer. We're waiting for that offer, and no one is forthcoming.
But she said right now that they're prepared to sit down, that there's room for negotiation. What would be the harm in sitting down and seeing how much room there is?
Well, Jack, this is the problem. The school trustees do not know what the BCSTA negotiator is saying to me, and he is definitely and clearly stating there is nothing further to offer.
So therefore, Nan Henry doesn't know what she's talking about.
You want to believe it.
And you have not actually, why don't you meet with them? If Henry and company will be there as well as the negotiator, why don't you go for a full-scale meeting of the trustees and the media and their spokesman?
Jack, trustees aren't even showing up to the meetings. It's BCSTA negotiator down the line.
It seems to be a kind of stubbornness on both sides, Fred, doesn't it, as an outsider?
No, it's nothing but accreditation and the problems of that legislation for CUPE unions. We are not provincial bargaining groups, and accreditation does not work.
You want a written offer from the BC school trustees accredited bargainer before you'll go back and talk to them?
That's correct.
A written offer?
Not necessarily written. They can give it to a mediator. Even the local priest in any local church can take an offer such as that.
What do you
if
think?
the time is right, mediation will work.
If Williams appoints an industrial inquiry commissioner, will you go back and they lift the lockout? Would you then go back to work?
No way. That would take the pressure off in our advantage, whatever it may be. An industrial inquiry commissioner would not work. It's a voluntary structure and does nothing but delay the whole process. It takes so long to complete it. Everybody waits for the miracle at the end of the road, and it doesn't necessarily happen, as it didn't in the city of Trail recently.
So you would reject an industrial inquiry commissioner?
Yeah, I don't believe it would work. There just has to be more money. Our position is justified.
Fred, I'm out of questions. Brian, anything I've missed, Brian?
Just one situation, Fred, and the school board, in fairness to them, has argued this point. You want the same agreement for everybody, more or less a master agreement for all the areas involved. Why not bargain as one unit?
No, we don't want a master agreement.
You're asking for the same in the way of money.
We're asking only for the same in basic wages, nothing else. We want our individual collective agreements. We're simply trying to achieve a goal of money. And the Okanagan is the example and the justification. It's sitting on our doorstep. We want nothing to do with the Okanagan collective agreement.
So you're saying the situation is teachers, administrators are getting the same pay in the two areas. Why shouldn't you get the same pay from the same school boards?
Yeah, and so are the school trustees getting the same rates of compensation.
Okay, Brian and Fred, thank you very much. What I'm going to do now is take a break, run one short segment of telephone calls, but I'd be grateful if you'd stand by just in case something pertinent comes up that Fred might be able to answer. Webster, a break.
Break down and get out there and cover them.
Well, please don't break down.
Break down our gear, that's what I mean.
Oh, I thought you were going to break down. Okay, a great effort this morning, Brian. Thanks to Grant and Ken. Who else is with you?
Grant and Ken, just the two of us.
Just Grant
or the
and
three
Ken.
of us, I should say.
Yeah, one.
And they've done a great job, too, in addition to BC Tel. We should just point out in leaving, as we've talked to the individuals involved in the dispute here this morning, we can see why there's been a deadlock, because we really haven't got any kind of an agreement, have we?
Well, no. We can only tell people what's going on, but it becomes quite obvious that there's an awful lot of stubbornness on both sides and considerable inaction by the government in the face of a crisis which may have been overlooked because it is so far away from Victoria. Thanks, Brian. You can cut out and break down.
Thanks very much, Jack.
When will you be back?
We'll have a report on the news hour tonight, and hopefully, depending on the situation here, back tomorrow.
And if you see any good stuff for the Webster show, apart from the school strike, don't forget to stop and pick it up on your way by.
Of course.
Thanks, Brian.
Bye from Nelson.
Bye. Thank you very much indeed. Telephone calls. Webster, camera 2. Where am I going? Cranbrook. 351. Oh, Pat McGeer. Pat?
Yes, Jack.
Dr. McGeer, well, we had an interesting morning this morning.
Yes, it's very interesting.
And we came across this obvious clash between Pike and the school board. The chief negotiator, Nan Henry, says there's room for bargaining, and Pike says no way unless they get a written offer. This is a piece of stubbornness, isn't it?
Well, that's the nature of all labor disputes. I don't think this is different in kind from any others that one might have, whether it's the post office or whatever.
But this is the tail wagging the dog.
Well, that's the way the legislation was set up, and I think at the time it was drafted, the closure of schools was really not contemplated as a serious possibility. But this dispute and others that we've had on Vancouver Island make it a very real possibility.
Okay, next question.
To consider whether or not this is a wise arrangement legislatively that will let the youngsters suffer. I, naturally, as Minister of Education, think that we cannot permit education to suffer.
Well, we tried to get hold of Alan Williams this morning, but he was obviously quite busy on a number of things. What about an Industrial Inquiry Commissioner? You might chat him up on that one.
Well, that's something that comes under his legislation, and I must honestly tell you, I don't administer that legislation. I don't appreciate the nuances.
No, but you can talk to him.
That would be entirely up to him to describe to you what his leverage might be and how he thinks it would be wise to apply it. I can only tell you that the Minister of Education has no power to intervene in matters of this kind.
Except with the...
We do have the responsibility of seeing that the youngsters of British Columbia are educated.
Mr. McGeer.
And in my view, the Minister of Education should have some power to prevent this sort of thing happening, and I will so recommend.
Good. Now, the next cabinet meeting is on Monday. Are you going to stand up and say, for God's sake, do something, Alan, Mr. Bennett, etc.?
I'm sure that this will come under discussion at the cabinet, but again, cabinet decisions are something which are taken jointly, and discussions in cabinet are never discussed outside of cabinet.
Dr. McGeer will raise the matter at cabinet on Monday at the very latest. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Dr. McGeer.
Righto.
Bye. Bye. Go ahead, please, from Cranbrook. Am I got the right one? No, I haven't. Go ahead, please.
Good morning, Jack.
Morning.
I'm calling from Cranbrook, where, as you know, we had a dispute similar to this and was just resolved. But it strikes me that the person that's getting away almost scot-free was your last caller, because he has, held a gun to the school trustees and their bargainers by saying there'll be no more than 5%, not 1 penny. Now, how can they bargain in good faith with a gun like that at their head?
They can take it out of the backs of local taxpayers, local property owners.
Couldn't McGeer, in this instance, say, look, we have a situation in which, obviously, it should be rectified. We will loosen the purse strings and make a little more money available to you and get this situation resolved.
Quite obviously, no. He will not be allowed to do any such thing. The financial policy of the province is set by the Premier and Evan Wolf. 5% is said. 5% it is. And it was made perfectly clear that anything additional comes out of the backs of the local property owners.
But isn't this stubbornness of theirs affecting 14,000 children in the West Kootenay?
Just a minute. If you look at the cost of education in British Columbia, especially in the lower mainland, where the number of children in school is dropping by thousands and thousands, and the number of teachers doesn't drop, and they get their 7-8% plus their 3% increment, we've got school administrators coming out of everybody's ears, and obviously, and I'm no social creditor, nor am I an NDP, obviously somebody must say enough is enough, Proposition 13. I mean, really.
But don't you believe, Jack, that the $650 stenographer and janitors, that this is an inequity and it should be rectified? And if they were brought up to the Okanagan standards, I think they would go back to work.
Well, now, in the parity with the Okanagan, there may well be a very good point, but that's got to come out of the backs of the property owners in the West Kootenays. That's quite obvious.
I think that the province, if they were to loosen up with some money and help that school board there, that the situation could be resolved.
If he loosens up with money for that school board there, Bennett, who is already committed up to his armpits with this incredible BC rail mess and a few other things, despite the talk of surpluses, would be deluged with trouble. You got to deal with it on a provincial-wide basis like at Olympic. Why we did this program this morning, one of the reasons we did it, we've covered it well on the news hour, but we added this bonus this morning because of the fact that it brings that incredible dispute involving these children to the people of all of British Columbia and isn't merely talked of in a couple of paragraphs as some dispute in the West Kootenays.
Well, do you agree, Jack, though, that these school boards have a gun at their head and can't really bargain in good faith?
Sure they have. And they better settle it one way or another, or they should be ordered back to work by the legislature. It's not a funny matter, and the primary interest in this case is not of the teachers, it's of the children. And then there I think I've got to leave a telephone call. Take a couple of calls before I take a break, because I've got a very important person sitting here waiting to be interviewed on a matter of national interest, the Farris case. Go ahead, please.
Is it me?
Yes.
Yeah, a little disappointed in you, Jack Webster. With low wages like this, I've seen a few years ago where you would have gone through the roof and
First
really
of all,
started a crusade to rectify the situation.
First of all, I don't have all the facts in front of me. 650 take home. I don't know what a gross pay is. I don't know what our experience is.
You know what the pattern is in these strikes is they won't impose an industrial inquiry commissioner. The idea is to leave them out 3 months and starve them back.
But the parents won't let them do that.
And I think the union would accept an industrial inquiry commissioner, but because
Pike says no.
Well, that remains to be
That
seen.
would at least bring out the facts, but don't tell me to make a judgment. Well, from what I know of school board employees, by and large, including non-teaching employees on the Lower Mainland, they're damn well paid.
And nobody cares about the kids. Let's remember that.
That's why we're doing the program.
Too, who locked them out.
We care about the kids.
The school trustees don't, though, do they? Or they wouldn't lock them out.
Well, what does that mean? They were struck, first of all, in one school district.
Yeah,
and
but
whether
they didn't
Pike...
have to touch the other places.
Just a minute. Whether Pike likes it or not, this question of collective accreditation is now the technique used by the employers to stop the big unions from chopping them off one at a time. And you can't say that CUPE is some small, helpless union. It's just the biggest union, probably the most powerful union in BC.
Well.
Okay, bye. Don't give me that garbage. Nobody there. I hung up in disgust. Go ahead, please.
Hello?
Yes, ma'am.
Am I speaking?
Yes. Yes,
Mr.
you are.
Webster?
Yes.
Yes, I'd like to mention one point that doesn't seem to have been mentioned by any other person. In the fall, there was a note in the newspaper of a promised grant being given to school boards who keep their spending costs low. In other words, any board in this area which goes over budget would not qualify for this special little pat on the head. Do you think that this would be fair? A fair statement by Mr. Bennett?
Don't know if it is. I just know that if they kept within certain limits, they'd get a small grant. There I'm ending, for the moment, the West Kootenay School Board strike. We'll cover it as it happens. Brian and the crew will be up there all day today. And if necessary, who knows what's going to happen. But that's a fairly comprehensive report, as much as we could do with the microwave facilities out of Nelson, thanks to BC Tel, and our crew, Grant, Ken, and Brian Coxford. Next, Stu Leggatt. Good morning, again. And with me just now is Stu Leggatt, the NDP MP for New Westminster. New Westminster. And he and I are, you know, one can't be too close to politicians, but as far as politicians go, we're quite good friends. Is that not a fact?
I think that's true, Jack.
Do you plead guilty to that accusation?
I would have to admit there have been moments when I felt your performance was adequate.
Oh, thank you very much. And just by the way, it takes me, being a hyperactive person, a couple of minutes to come down after what was, to me, was quite exciting television coverage this morning.
Yeah, not bad.
Not bad, eh?
Yeah.
Oh, thanks for the praise. Anyway, I'll tell you what we're going to do, Stu. This afternoon, outside the House of Commons, Mr. Mark Lalonde, the new Minister of Justice, will be making a statement. I ascertained this morning. On the subject nobody wants to talk about, the Farris, the instant Farris resignation, regardless of the mere substance of certain allegations apparently made against him. But to give me time to catch my breath and to see the reaction on the face of Stu Leggatt, here comes the film which we ran on the news hour last night from what I regard as very uninformed MPs.
I think that everyone has to understand that as the Minister of Education, I can do nothing.
Out of it, we'll do another 15-second cue. McGeer's been around the studio so much this morning that he just won't go off the telecine or videotape chain. Let me say again, we're going to see from the 6 o'clock news last night some opinions on the Farris case from a number of miscellaneous, and I mean that word in its least respectable term, miscellaneous member of parliaments on this very important thing about the Farris. How long do I have to ad-lib? Oh, 7 seconds, 6 seconds, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Film up.
That closes the matter because you become a private citizen unless there is some, surprising or new evidence which would really give indication that there should be a full inquiry, but not at this time.
Whether any good would come of an inquiry at this point, I don't know.
On the weekends I've been home, I haven't had access to many newspapers, and therefore I'm not really well enough informed to take a position on that question at the present time.
We will have more information on that when the process is completed. Right now, the government has delegated its authority to a council of judges, and that the executive committee, I understand, is now prepared its initial report, which the government will study this week.
If there is some misdemeanor or wrongdoing, then it's up to the Attorney General, I should think, to lay charges.
Well, I don't know that we're competent to say anything about that. I think that the Chief Justice is handing down a report, and if he feels that there's been criminal activity, then obviously the prosecutors ought to go after it.
At this moment, on the basis of what I know, the answer would be no. The gentleman has removed himself from the bench, so an inquiry into what?
The question at the fore end of that tape was, should there be a public inquiry into the resignation of Chief Justice John Farris? Stuart, I want to tell you why I've been after you so persistently, pressingly and persistently, I might say.
Notice that, yeah.
To get your opinion on the Farris situation. Because everywhere I have turned since the resignation of the Chief, since the announced leave of absence and possible resignation at the end of the year of the Chief Justice, everywhere I've gone in the legal profession, I have found, if not a conspiracy of silence, a similarity of interest among the leaders of the legal profession in this province, whereby none would say anything other than the merest short television or radio clip saying, oh well, resigned, that should be the end of it. No good would be obtained by a full investigation or a full investigation into the circumstances of Chief Justice Farris's disappearance from the bench. So, in the absence of a spokesman for the legal profession, and in the absence, and you'll correct me if I'm wrong, of any questions where there is total privilege on the floor of the House of Commons, I came to you as both a well-known and capable lawyer and a well-known and capable MP to see if you would tell me of your concerns for the integrity, dignity, decorum, and probity of the bench, and if you would support me in the uncomfortable feeling I have that if we in the media chicken out of tackling the total establishment, we have no right in any moral situations in the future of opening our mouths. Now, how do you feel about the way this has been handled up to now and the attitude of your fellow brethren both in the House of Commons and in the legal profession?
I have to first of all plead somewhat guilty, because my initial reaction to this was that if the Chief Justice resigns, he should be entitled to his private life and to his privacy. However, there's another aspect to it. That was at the point where the Judicial Council was investigating it. I thought they were investigating it. Now we are not sure that in fact an investigation has taken place. We'll know this afternoon. The new Minister of Justice is going to make a statement, not in the House, by the way, but outside the House. He should make this statement in the House so that members of Parliament have a chance to respond to that statement. Now there's something that has been missed in this, and it's that the Judicial Council will not look into a matter unless one of two things occurs. Either the individual judge is to be called as a witness in a criminal case, or there is a criminal aspect to his particular behavior. Now, whether that in fact was the mandate that was given to the Judicial Council, we don't know. I don't know whether there has in fact been an investigation. I'm not at this point calling for a public investigation until I know what the Judicial Council has done. Now, there's a real problem in terms of constituencies. I heard one MP say, I haven't had any questions. Well, I'm afraid my office hasn't been the same. I've had a number of people ask what's going on with regard to judges in British Columbia. Okay? There's just been too much lately. Now, I think we in the political field have an obligation to make sure that we retain that delicate kind of balance in a democracy and confidence in the bench. Now, that being the case, I'm going to suspend my judgment until I hear what the Minister of Justice says today. But if that does not indicate that the circumstances surrounding this resignation are not covered, then my view is that there has to be a proper and total inquiry. Whether in camera or not is a matter for the decision of the Judicial Council. I have great confidence, by the way, in Chief Justice Laskin to conduct a proper inquiry in terms of his own discretion.
Let me recap you before we take a short break.
Yeah.
If the statement by the Minister of Justice, which, by the way, is being made in the wrong forum today, out of the House instead of in the House, where if you were there you could ask a question, if that does not, to the satisfaction of ordinary people, disclose the logical and understandable situation leading to his resignation, you will demand a full inquiry.
Yeah. I don't think you can have an inquiry into the RCMP, for example, and argue that this is to restore confidence in the police, and have a different standard for members of the bench. So that there is that aspect to it that, in fact, when the full facts are revealed, you can restore confidence. I think the bench has improved tremendously since I started practice, by the way.
One moment, please. Quick break, and then we can have a few minutes to wrap up the Farris situation as it now stands.
15 seconds for Linda and closing. Okay?
Why is there such a silence among your legal colleagues? Won't speak.
I don't know whether there is a silence. You know, that's your impression, not mine.
No, my word for it.
Yeah, all right. Your word for it as a news commentator. I presume there's a lot of people who don't want to prejudge this case without knowing all the facts and without knowing too much
All right, let's
about
look at the facts we know. On November the 10th, after the initial whispers, the Chief Justice submits a letter. I have been advised that certain allegations against me, not of a criminal nature, have been referred. The mere fact that these allegations have been made regardless of their substance have so impaired my usefulness as Chief Justice that it is in the public interest that I resign. Right?
Yeah.
What does that mean, that letter? It means that it's tantamount to some kind of admission of something or other by which the Chief Judge in all of British Columbia walks away from a lifetime job.
Only admission in that letter is that his usefulness as a judge has been impaired because of the allegations. There's no admission of guilt within
Does
that
that mean
particular letter.
that any judge faced with allegations, and they can be made by witnesses in any trial,
that's a matter for,
would get up and walk away?
Well, that's a matter for the individual judge. They may have a different reaction in a different situation. Judge Benrod decided to face the music, and I think that perhaps is to his credit.
Don't get into the Benrod thing. You're on dangerous ground in the Benrod thing. Let's keep to the Farris thing. That having been done, what do you say to those MPs who say resignation is enough? Because resignation, surely, even in your view, is not enough.
No, the public are entitled to know the circumstances and are entitled to be reassured that the bench is performing the kind of function that it's there for. Now, I'm convinced that it is, but I happen to be a part of that legal conspiracy that knows a lot of judges and happens to have great respect for them. But there's a political aspect to this that a good number of MPs, I think, have missed, and that is that their constituents are entitled I represent my constituency, not as a lawyer. I represent them as an elected member of Parliament. And I have an obligation to see that they are assured that the highest principles of the bench are being carried out.
All right, and I won't quote any of the famous American Chief Justices to you, but let me quote the Benrot case to you. First of all, I'm talking about the public suspicions of politicians and judicial counsels. In the Benrot case first, a house detective bells the cat. If he hadn't belled the cat, nothing would have been done. Will you take my word for that?
I don't know the Benrot case, but I'll take your word for it. All right.
Secondly, the plan was to hold a secret hearing on the Benrot case. They would not tell us. By applying pressure, we're going to public hearing. Why should there be a public hearing on a judge at one end of the legal scale, and the other gentleman, because of his high position in the land, the legal profession and MP attitude is, oh, that's good enough. Let him walk away.
You've asked two questions, and they're both important. First of all, I agree with your point that the Chief Justice must be treated the same as any other judge. In fact, the responsibilities of a provincial court judge are very high. Can, in many cases, be just as high as those of the Chief Justice. So the standard should be the same. I agree. In terms of the in-camera question for the looking at a provincial judge, there is a question of whether you'll impair the judge anyway by the evidence that comes out. And if the evidence on balance shows that nothing was wrong, that there was no problem whatsoever, all that evidence could destroy that particular judge's effectiveness. So there's a discretion here
First of all,
in terms of whether you hold it in
another
camera or
judge
not.
had decided there was a prima facie case for investigation, don't forget. It wasn't a mere allegation against Benrot. It was a prima facie investigation. Now, why, therefore, should there not be, in the Farris case, a full public inquiry regardless?
One of the questions is whether the allegations are false. That still has to be a consideration. Now, if you have a public inquiry into a matter where the allegations are false, you leave such a taste in the mouth of the public and in terms of the credibility of that particular judge, you destroy his usefulness in any event. So you should be very sure that the allegations have substance to them before there is a public inquiry. That's my view. And that has to be a discretionary matter on the part of the investigating authority.
If somebody said that about you or me, and we were in a public position, there's no way I would say, because of certain allegations, I am about to resign. I'd say, sue.
That's right.
Public hearing.
I'm sure
fight.
I'm sure we'd both come on camera immediately, but you know, different people react differently, and I'm not going to sit here in judgment on the Chief
question,
Justice.
short answer. You are afraid, speaking broadly, that a public investigation might so impair the fabric of the judiciary that it might not recover?
No. Not of the judiciary, of an individual allocation against an individual judge, which is found to have no substance after the inquiry. That judge's credibility could be destroyed. So one should be, I'm not against public inquiries. I think in the Benrot case, for example, it was a desirable thing and it was a good thing. I think you were right in pressing for it. But that's not a rule that should apply all the time as of right.
Thank you for coming. We'll watch with interest for the announcement by Mark Lalonde, unfortunately outside the House in Ottawa this afternoon. Quickly. Special thanks. BC Tel. Where am I? Ken Gardner, Bob Browning, Ken McClelland, and Vern Epp, I think the name is, of Nelson BC Tel Radio Centre, whose combined efforts made possible this unique program. We'll have more coverage on the air tonight. Linda, what's for tomorrow?
Vic Stevens tomorrow.
Vic Stevens?
Leader of the Provincial Conservatives.
What does he do again?
He's a lawyer.
He's leader of the provincial, and he is a lawyer.
He's going to elect us as governor.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Stu, Brian, everybody, Linda, the crew this morning. Thank you very much. Tomorrow at 9 a.m. precisely.